do so now. Mine's now dead. As most of you know, the afternoon works like this. We'll start with me conducting a short interview, punctuated I hope by one or two songs, and then we'll throw the floor open for you to ask questions. And the first year journalists are asking questions as part of a project, so although they get first shout, the rest of you do join in. And then we'll take a break till 3 o'clock, and at 3 o'clock we'll come back and there'll be a short concert when our two guests will have command of the floor and I will sit at the back and enjoy myself. So, let me introduce them. With us today we've got Deborah Cowan and John Roberts, and you're in the midst of a UK tour. When did you start?
We started in Liverpool at the Everyman Folk Club. It's run by Huey Jones, who is one of the founding members of the Spinners group. And then from there we continued on to, I'm going to let you say the name of the club because it was in Wales, and I can never get it right.
It was Santra, wasn't it?
It was. And
My father was Welsh.
So I got a wee Welsh lesson as we were driving down the M6, and from there we went to Coventry. Then from Coventry back up here to West Yorkshire in Keighley. And where do we go from Keighley?
South
Shields, with a little detour in Gateshead to see our dear friend Louisa Killen. And last night we were in Highcliffe.
Near Darlington.
Yes.
Now, that sounds like a lot of travelling, but you've just finished a similar tour of the States where the distances in Britain look trivial compared to what you're having to do over there.
Oh, well, yeah, I was just in Chicago and traveling from Massachusetts. I live in Massachusetts, near the city of Boston. So I always like to say, I always think the body is a great geographical tool. So if you were to look at a map of the American East Coast, up in the north there's a bit that sticks out like an elbow, and that's called Cape Cod, and that's Massachusetts. So Cape Cod comes around like this. It's where the Pilgrims first landed before they got to Plymouth, and I'm about here. In a town called Shrewsbury, or as you would know it, Shrewsbury. And I just finished a 2-week tour from Massachusetts to the Midwest, United States, to Chicago, and then back again, and that was about 3,500 miles. So that would be like going across the ocean and back, really. Or going, where on the continent would that be?
It will be beyond Spain into Africa.
So,
Fair trek.
and it was all driving.
And we're talking about place names, and John, you live in a place whose name I can never say right.
I live in Schenectady, New York. It's the only Schenectady in the world. And we're not sure. We don't know whether it's Dutch origin. A lot of Dutch settlers settled there. It's on the banks of the Mohawk River, which is a river that goes east-west across New York State and joins the Hudson River, which then goes north-south down to New York City. So, and it was settled by the Dutch, but there are a lot of Indians there too, so we don't know if it's an Indian name or a Dutch name, because nobody can make much sense of it. Although some of the local Abenaki Indians claim that it's Indian, of course. But then...
And unlike Leeds, it was a place that was important for inland water travel.
It was very important for inland water travel. It was a commercial area for trade up the Mohawk. There'd be they had these boats. The State Museum near me built a replica of one of these about 20 years ago, and people still paddle it around. And so it's a 3-man boat that could carry a lot of cargo. You could pole it, or you could sail. You could put up a sail, or you could row it. And Schenectady was one of the places where they'd come back with furs and whatnot, and sell them, and then they'd be taken down to Albany and shipped out. So
Now, although you're touring the country together, you're not strictly a duo, are you? You've recorded together, you've done a couple of tracks.
Well,
yeah, we're not really a duo.
no.
So how come you're here together?
Because Deb said, "Do you want to tour England?" And I said, "Sure."
But you're well. Do you count yourself as Welsh or English? Because you were born in Wales and grew up in.
I grew up English,
Right.
so I'm.
So when did the move to America come?
I went to after I went to Manchester University and I graduated from there, and then I went on VSO to India, where I taught English. And when I was there, I met a bunch of Peace Corps people who said you should go to the States for graduate school because they pay you. And I said, that's very nice. And so I looked into it, and sure enough, they did. There was a lot of money flowing around at the time, and I got a 4-year fellowship to go to Cornell University in experimental psychology. And so I went over there in '68.
And stayed.
Did my 4 years, never finished my doctorate, and became a dropout folk singer.
And you kind of did the opposite thing, because you came and lived in Scotland for
Yeah.
3 years, was it?
No, very short time, 6 months.
Oh, when you talk about it, it seems longer. You squeeze a lot in.
It seemed like it was longer, but that could have been the amount of pints I was drinking. But yeah, I was feeling kind of at loose ends, and at the time I was a school teacher and decided that I really wanted to investigate the folk music and investigate the music over here. And Edinburgh just seemed to be the right place to do it. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Something I don't regret for a single minute. It was great.
Now, obviously, partly what we're going to ask you to do in the course of the afternoon is to sing and play. So let's talk instruments and start with John. In the folk community, there are 2 instruments that are the butt of endless insults and jokes, and John plays both of them. Let's start with a stringed instrument first.
Well, this is a banjo. It's an open back banjo. It's a 5-string banjo. It has a short 5th string that sort of acts as a drone. And it has an open back because it really doesn't need to be played especially loudly. They used to have open backs. People put resonators on them when you start to play bluegrass style, and you'd start to play with finger picks to get a lot of volume out of it, and you'd use heavier strings. I play an old-fashioned American style called frailing, which involves playing down on the strings rather than picking, and playing down and then putting in the drone or other notes with my thumb, and a little bit of a strum, so it basically goes. You can hear my thumb hitting the head all the time. So you can play tunes this way. So that's what I do. It's a southern mountain style of playing, and I accompany English folk songs with it. So that's the banjo. This one has a tiny head. If you've seen banjos, this is much smaller than usual.
Probably originally of African origin.
They were originally African, and they came over, and in the Appalachian Mountains, there was a lot of interchange between blacks and whites there, one way or another, and the whites picked up some of the African instruments and changed them around a bit. They were mass manufactured from about the 1870s, I think. And they became very popular in England as well through the touring minstrel shows. And a lot of banjos were manufactured in England, and in fact some very fine banjos were made in England up to about 1900, 1910.
But a real English instrument.
Well,
in a box pretending to be a drum for some reason.
yeah. Yes and no. This is a concertina. There are several different kinds of concertina. What a concertina is a harmonica, because there's a reed and you blow on it, or you push air through it, and depending on which way you're blowing, you can get one reed going or another one. And this is not an English concertina,
No.
which is a style of arranging the buttons so they do things. This is what's known as an Anglo concertina, which sounds very confusing when you say that it's different from an English concertina. And it's known as an Anglo because that's a shortened form of German, Anglo-German. The German concertina, you play notes of a scale on the push going up from the bottom left to the top right, and the other notes on the pull. So to play a scale, you have to keep going in and out, and so there's really that's a scale in one key. Then I have a scale in another key. And what the English, that's all the German concertina had, and what the English did is add an extra row that gave you some of the notes that you didn't have in one direction in that direction, and it gave you some sharps and flats, so you could play a little bit more flexibly. And this is then known as the Anglo-German concertina, and of course it got abbreviated to the Anglo. Mine are made in London by Jeffries, and they he didn't put serial numbers on, but they're probably from around, between, I've got two that are in different keys, probably from the 1890s, somewhere between 1890 and 1912.
And a hugely popular instrument in its day.
In its day it was. These are sort of classic examples, and these were top-of-the-line instruments. But they made a lot of cheaper instruments that were just brought out, and sailors would take them to sea. Yes. Because they're small and portable, and they went all over the world.
So if you watch old films, it's a game which several people play, there's a definite point at which the instrument was invented. And so when you see 18th century sailing ships with apparently having concertina players on, they've all travelled in time to get there.
Yeah.
There was an instrument which didn't yet exist.
The idea of a reed like this, which it came from China in probably people started using it in Europe in about 1825, and people in England started making the concertina in Germany and Italy as well. And the harmonica was pretty much invented at about the same time because it uses the same technology. The accordion was invented at the same time, and there are all sorts of different kinds of accordions, some with a piano keyboard, some with rows of buttons, and those were all invented. Everything started in the late 1820s. And if you see a concertina or an accordion or a mouth organ, purported to be before 1825. No.
Somebody's not doing their research.
The technical word is an anachronism.
That's true, yes. They're two real folky instruments. Can you show people that without revealing the word? This is Deborah.
Well, it's
on the back as
it's
well.
on the back. Here, how's that?
Yeah. Any guesses?
There.
No, it's a guitar.
Okay, Deborah, show us what it is.
So it's,
This normally brings out gasps at clubs.
I don't know if you can get a shot of that. This is a guitar that was invented by a luthier named Harvey Leach. He's in Northern California, and he invented this guitar, probably around 2003. And he always had, as a traveling musician, one of our difficulties is taking instruments on airplanes, because you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because they won't let you carry it on, but then again, if you put it in the hold, they're going to destroy it. So he came up with this guitar that fits in the overhead luggage bin in the airplane, and this is the beauty of it. I'll have to make adjustments.
Yes.
Well, yeah. So it's extremely portable, which is a nice advantage, and it has made life a lot easier for me. And so this is the instrument that I play mainly. I took up the English concertina a number of years ago, but I haven't mastered it like some people.
I have English concertinas, but one can only take so much on a plane.
He was only allowed 2.
And I can only carry so much on my back in any case. At one point I used to carry a guitar and a banjo and a couple of concertinas and a button accordion, and I said, no. So the guitar went and the accordion went.
We have an acquaintance that says if it takes more than 2 trips to the car, it's not folk music.
That seems like a fair idea. And you actually photographed holding a very different guitar, which is connected with a guy who built that, which is the Martin.
Oh, right. The luthier who invented this guitar and who also builds guitars is also one of the top inlay artists in the world, and he has done several commissioned guitars for Martin, and this latest one is the 1,500th guitar that Martin has built, and he inlaid the Mona Lisa, a replica of the Mona Lisa, on the headstock, and then
1.5 million.
Yeah.
There's a lot of guitars.
And I think it's on the bottom lower bout of the guitar, he inlaid the Last Supper. And then on the back, in scrimshaw, is a scrimshaw replica of Leonardo da Vinci's The Man sketch. One of those.
You better explain what scrimshaw is.
Oh, you might be better with that.
Well, scrimshaw is whalebone that whaling sailors used to take whalebone and they would sort of carve in it and draw in it and put ink in it to make these very complicated drawings, often of you see something like a whale's tooth that has this whole whaling adventure with the boat with harpooners killing the whale and the whale ship in the background, and this would all be done, it's sort of inscribed into whalebone, and it's certainly a collectible art form. Some of the whaling voyages used to take 3 or 4 years, and sort of between, you didn't spend that whole time catching whales. First you had to get there, and in the later days of whaling, the whaleboats that went from New England, from New Bedford and Nantucket, had to sail around Cape Horn into the northern Pacific, where the best whaling grounds were. and then they'd come down to Hawaii and refit, and then maybe go back again to fill the oil barrels. But a whale trip, it could be 3-4 years that they'd be away, and a lot of this time some of the crew would be looking for whales, but the rest of them wouldn't have a lot to do.
And they don't use whalebone anymore in modern scrimshaw.
Right.
I think that's
Plastic's all the go.
that's a punishable offense.
Or in corsets, they get it. Now,
Not in mine, it is.
well, I came to see you on Friday night, and one thing that surprised me, having spent so much time telling people how important it is to prepare and have everything planned out, you work without a set list. How does that happen?
Well, I stopped using a set list about 3 or 4 years ago, and but when I first started out, I had a set list. I had to have a plan because I just wasn't experienced enough in performing. I really felt like I needed to know what was coming next. And as the years went on, I started becoming more comfortable with what I was doing, and I deviate from the set list just a wee bit. Like I think, oh, I have another song. I should have done that song. Well, I'll do it now. And as time went on, I moved away from the set list. And for me, it's much more freeing. I find that I can go with the flow of a performance, and I can sense what the audience is. What kind of reactions are coming from the audience, and it just seems to, it suits me better. There are other performers who have to have a set list and have to have everything planned down to the words they're going to use between the songs, what they're going to say. I'm not like that. I like to just kind of freeform things.
It's one thing working by yourself without a set list, but when there's two of you, that raises other complications. Or do you use?
Well, I've done it for years, because I've sung a lot in the States where I sing mostly English folk songs and try and introduce America to the culture such as it is. And when I got to Ithaca, New York, to Cornell University, I discovered that in my department there was another Englishman also arriving, and who was also interested in folk song. So a little while later we started singing together, and we still do. And we've never worked from a set list. Somebody has to have an idea, though, of what to do next.
Yes.
Well, I will say that when I am working with a side person, I have worked with other instrumentalists who accompany me. They're not. They basically work for me. I pay them as they're my employee, and at that point I have to have a set list because they have to. I'm the boss, so they have to know exactly what's coming next. So when I work with Brooks Williams, who's a wonderful guitarist who lives over here now, or another guitarist, Bill Cooley, we always have a set list. So that is a big difference.
You said on Friday that John introduced English folk music to the Americans. A slight hyperbole.
A slight hyperbole.
Well, probably, but I really do think that John and Tony and Lou Killen, and David, but
there's a bunch of us who live over there, and a lot of us know each other, and we see each other across the country. I don't go to San Francisco or Seattle or Los Angeles very much, but every few years I get out there and I know the British folk song people out there, and so we all know each other.
And of course Louisa, who you saw over the weekend, used to live in the States.
Yes, who used to be Lou Killen and is now Louisa Killen. But my introduction to traditional English folk music was through rock and roll. And mainly, I think the first group where I got kind of a hint of what was to come was Jethro Tull, and specifically the album Aqualung. And how old was I? I was 13 when I first heard that. And there was something about that record that hit me, and I don't know what I still, well, back then I couldn't explain it because I was 13. But from there I heard Steel Ice Band and Pentangle, Fairport Convention, all groups, those three groups were the ones that took English traditional folk music and made it accessible to people who had no idea about English traditional folk music. And I went along merrily listening to that for many years. And then in the mid-1980s, I was introduced to this duo called Roberts and Barrand. Somebody handed me a cassette tape of Spencer the Rover. That's what it was Spencer the Rover. And said, oh, you should listen to this. And I just went, oh, this is very interesting. Because it was there was no electric instruments, it was just voices and perhaps a concertina, but mostly voices.
Mostly voices.
Mostly voices. And then from there, I was told about the Copper family down in Sussex, who had been handing down songs through the generations for, I think they said 400 years, over 400 years.
They trace it directly back to about the 1780s,
Yeah.
but they know that stuff was going on before there because they were there.
So I kind of went backwards, started out with the rock and roll and then ended up with the real deal. And I probably went off on a total tangent there.
As you got the instruments out and you've been sort of hip hop, how about letting us hear something?
Sure.
Two people who decide what's appropriate to play, I'll let you decide.
What do you think? What should we do?
I know.
You don't know.
You do one.
You want me to do one? All right.
Well, you got the guitar.
I've got the guitar handy. Well, yeah, so my mind goes blank. What do you want to hear, Nigel?
Oh, heavens. A Richard Thompson song.
Oh, Richard Thompson.
Good place to start.
Okay. All right. I hope I'm in tune still.
Deborah mentioned a group called Fairport Convention, and she's going to do a song by a guy that was in the band when it started and left in the early 70s. And last year curated the Bell Festival in London. He's now a hugely respected songwriter and guitarist, and a particularly fine guitarist as well. And writes some of the most depressing songs you've ever heard. But hopefully you can find something slightly more fun than is more depressing. And what you got?
Well, since John knows the chord, well, you kind of know this one, yeah. So this one's a depressing one.
Oh, right.
Yeah, why not? Why not? I set the bar. I don't write songs myself. And it's because I set the bar on songwriting very, very high. And I've tried to write songs and I can never reach that level of excellence that some of the finest songwriters reach. And Richard Thompson to me is probably one of the best songwriters around. So this is one that I used to sing in Edinburgh when I lived up there. And I had a dear friend of mine who sadly passed away 2 years ago, who always used to call for this song, and he'd have his dram of Morangi, and he'd say, "Drunkards, Debs, drunkards, give us some drunkards," and I'd sing "Down Where the Drunkards."
Is that what
Roll.
you're going? What key are you in?
I can be in. I could be in C.
You're in a G.
Yeah, G forms.
Can you go down one fret?
Like there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is very experimental.
Except I'll probably be singing very low. Oh, see the boys out walking. The boys, they look so fine. Dressed up in green velvet, their silver buckles shine. You can hear the cleary-eyed under a keg of wine, down where the drunkards
courtesy